Hey, y'all. This is Sam with the Roots of Change podcast. And for today's private episode, I really want to dig into Carole Cadwalladr's TED Talk, which is called This is What a Digital Coup Looks Like. Because I think that it's really important that we talk about what this moment is. We be very clear. We talk about language and we make sure that it is very accessible for people. Um, and we also need to talk about what collective action looks like right now. I think all of us are very overwhelmed in different capacities, and we're all experiencing fascism in real time. That is a very hard thing to experience, no matter how prepared you were for the new regime. But what I really appreciate about Carole Cadwalladr's TED Talk is one, she has the background. She is an investigative journalist based in the UK, and she broke the Facebook Cambridge Analytica story back in 2018, which was a digital coup from the 2016 election, where they used a lot of our own private data, our digital data, to manipulate the voters to shift how the election outcome came. So what that actually meant was they would hyper target people and send them specific messaging to either incentivize them to vote or to disincentivize them to vote. The Trump campaign, even this year in 2024, did not want, Black people to be voting. They were sending out micro-targeted messaging to Palestinian Americans saying, talking all about how Joe Biden doesn't care about them. And then they were sending completely opposite messaging to Jewish Americans on, Biden's anti-Semitic, you should vote for Trump, blah, blah, blah. So that has been happening since 2016, and we don't have the digital regulation to stop these types of attacks. And so that's why we are in this moment. And what I really appreciate about Carole Cadwalladr is, one, she is a human being. After she broke the Cambridge Analytica story, she was targeted. They went after her in every shape and form. They sued her. They tried to go after all of her money, all of her, her professional credibility. And this is a playbook, and she talks about this. This is the Putin playbook, but it's become a larger playbook from the big tech elite, which is to silence people who disagree with them. And you will be really surprised to know that a lot of the people that disagree with them are usually women. They're usually Black and brown folks. And Carole specifically calls that out, of saying, like, I am a small, slight woman, and you look at me and see me as weak. And so that's why you went after me. But she's still here. She's on that TED stage talking and talking about the digital coup. So that's where I want to talk about kind of some of the tips that she has that then translate specifically into your work. So if you work in nonprofits, if you work on your own and you're working towards social change, or even if you're just an activist and someone who cares about your own digital safety, we really need to be very clear about how we move in this moment, how you can protect your safety and your privacy. And then what that means collectively for us, because I think one of the biggest things right now is that the entire goal of fascism is to make it feel like we do not have power. And that is a lie. We have power. We have economic power. We have social power. We have so much power. And I'm going to talk about like the digital power that we can enact, because these companies, we have given them power. Meta, Google, all of these companies have power because we've been giving them our digital data. They know way too much about us. They know the intimate details about us, and we don't have regulation to stop them from using that in an inappropriate way, as you can see. And so, all of the news that I post in our social change newsletter, A lot of it's really dark, like Palantir is now working with ICE to bump up their systems so that they have better data to go after criminals and illegal immigrants and, all of this language of criminalization and crime. And we've been having that conversation since 2020 again for this reason, because when you make a big fuss and make it feel like there's all of this criminal activity, then you incite fear in the population, and fear leads to easier control. They are able to have more digital, they can access our digital lives even more because of this crime story that we've had. And so that's another piece that I talk about a lot, is like storytelling. We need to shift the story. We need to shift the narrative. And the narrative is, as Carole Cadwalladr says, this is a coup. This is a digital coup. It is not just a US based coup. It is a global takeover of the international order. And I really wish that that wasn't the case. It sounds wild for me to say that, but that is what is happening. And I won't get into it too much, but I read this book called Red Notice by Bill Browder. When was this? This was like 2014 or something. This talks all about Russia and the playbook, 2015. And it's called Red Notice, A True Story of High Finance, Murder, and One Man's Fight for Justice. And it really centers around the UK, so you can really understand why the UK politics are really messed up right now. But it also just talks about like the economic control that Putin uses, the different mechanisms that he uses to bring in the oligarchs. And again, all of that has to do with fear, because the oligarchs want money. What do they want? They want power, they want money, they want wealth, they want to be liked, Jeff Bezos, he really cares about his image, it feels like. Every time I see like his like working out, his neck muscles, like I'm pretty sure he's on steroids, but like they care a lot about how they are perceived. And so Putin has been able to leverage that in Russia, and now we're seeing that being, taken out into the global scale. And so that's something that we really need to be aware of, is these are not old tactics. These are not new tactics. These are old tactics. They are learning from Putin. If you listen to our episode from last week about the global organizing against the right, there is an interconnected right. And we need to be aware of that, because these big tech platforms are global, and they are working directly with these harmful governments to suppress us. Another piece of news this week is that Bluesky is silencing dissidents in some authoritarian countries already. So I know a lot of folks are moving over to Bluesky because they don't want to be on Twitter because it's harmful. Bluesky is also billionaire owned. They also have the same concerns. They aren't actually as independent as folks perceive. So like Mastodon and when we talk about the Fediverse, Bluesky is not really there, and they're not really making the moves to be fully in the Fediverse and fully independent. And so that's something that we need to be really, really careful about. Where are we moving? How are we moving? I would not recommend going to Bluesky. Go to Mastodon, go to the independent platforms. We have to move and build up the independent platforms. Like, where we put our energy is where things grow. If we're still on Instagram and we're still on, X and TikTok, like, we're wasting our energy by not moving folks over to healthier environments. And so that's something that we all can do from a collective action perspective. I think it's really important around collective movements, like what our role is. Again, if you're listening to this, you are active in social justice in some way. You care about creating a more just and liberatory and sustainable world. And so we can only do that together. And that's where, when we are so embedded in the social justice work, there's also so many other folks out there who care, but are just very overwhelmed. They are trying to live their lives right now. They are watching the stock market crash. They are wondering if their kids are going to get measles. And we can be a supportive force for folks in this moment and kind of help guide them towards healthier ways. I think we are starting to see folks kind of recognize the harms of these digital platforms in real time. And so that's our opportunity to say, like, hey, I see you and this sucks, like that's the one thing that Carole says is like, we have to name it. But I also think we have to like admit that, like, this sucks. We are in a digital coup. Carole Cadwalladr says, like, we are farther along than a lot of us realize. And that is absolutely true. I was deeply embedded in advertising, big tech, big finance. Like, I understand how much farther along we are than most folks are. And so we don't want to like scare people, but we want to hold them and help support them to say, like, this is really a really hard moment. And like, let's all kind of hold that together as we move into healthier environments. So what I would recommend, is we're all very busy. So start slow, start understanding, what are the alternatives. We are going to have a bunch of new, guests on over the next few weeks to really talk about what does a digital transition look like. We're going to have an episode specifically on de-Googling and breaking down, like, Google does so much, like, where do you go for search? Where do you go for cloud storage, mail, all of those things? We're going to talk about that. We're also going to get into Substack and the harms of Substack and why we need to move towards independent publishing. And I'm really excited to talk about with Sharon Hurley Hall about that. And then there's also, we're going to talk about the Fediverse and a little bit more concrete of like, how do you get started on the Fediverse? Because I definitely understand that fear of like, I have to pick a server, like, how do I find people? This is not as intuitive as the big tech platforms. And I get that. And so one, I want to help support and make sure that we're offering those resources so that it is easier to join. But also, like, I think we need to admit that these big tech platforms are big for a reason. We've been feeding their flames by giving them our data. Like, all of these platforms, for the most part, a lot of them are free. But by being on them, we are letting them sell ads and making money off of that. And they're also collecting everything that we're doing online. And that data is super profitable. We are very profitable for big tech. And so if we withhold our data, that is our power. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. But I think, like, as we transition, I kind of lost my thought. So I'm just going to get to that part of the collective action, because we're in a moment where old is new again. We're really seeing a lot of different kind of mirroring back to different periods, the 1960s and the kind of revolutionary action, civil rights movement, all of that. We are going back to the Gilded Age of wealth inequality and the fighting of unions and things like that. And these are all different pieces that we can learn from. And so I think while we are in this digital world, what are the lessons that we can take from previous activists, from previous movements, to learn in the digital realm? And so my proposal is that we need a digital Montgomery bus boycott. Because when we talk about the Montgomery bus boycott, everyone talks about the story of Rosa Parks not wanting to give up her seat on the bus, and how she just woke up crabby that day and it was on her and she didn't want to do it. And then all of a sudden it just sparked this movement and it just magically happened. That is not true. That is a story that white supremacy tells. Like when we look at these history books, that's a way to take out the collective action. It's a way to disinvest from like the larger movements that were built during that time. Because yes, Rosa Parks is an amazing human and she did a lot of work, but she also did a lot of work with other folks. She was collectively organizing before she got on that bus, so that when she got on that bus, she knew exactly what she was doing. They had all of those plans already in place. They had another person who had organized against the buses, and they decided that that person was not like the right face for the movement because she was, I believe, like unwed and a mother. And, it's so there's a lot for us to think about there of like, this is not just a one person thing, this is collective action. And so I think like the biggest lessons we can take from the Montgomery bus boycotts is that it's not just one person that is able to create change and to move movements forward. All of us can do that. And so I think, when we look at the Montgomery bus boycott history, they were out there for months, and they organized against the buses by being, with mutual aid, with community-driven ideas. Folks were living outside of the city and they had to bus into some of the wealthier white neighborhoods. When you're like, that is sacrifice. People had to sacrifice. They walked to work, they carpooled, they collectively organized to make sure that they still were able to get to their jobs while also saying, we reject your capitalist notion around this buses. Like, we are going to stand up for our liberties. And we're going to do that with our dollars, with our feet. We are going to walk and we are going to continue to make money, but we're not going to give that money back to you. And so that's what I think we need to be doing and thinking in this digital age is like, what is the Montgomery bus boycott of the digital age? And to me, it is data. Carole Cadwalladr said this in the TED Talk around, like, I think she said data is the crack cocaine for big tech, which is absolutely true. Working in advertising, like digital advertising is 100% data extraction. And I want to talk a little bit about like my history and why we are where we are, because I do think that advertising is at the root of all of this. But data is how we push back. Privacy is our power. The more that we can shift into systems that keep our data secure and away from big tech, they can't use our data. Like, yes, they have a lot of it already, but collectively, if we all shift and we all move, they don't have the power anymore. They can't extract from us in the same way that they were. They can't impact our mental health. If I'm not on Instagram, then they can't give me ads that make me feel bad about my body. Like, these are the actions that we can take, and they sound really small, but they become huge for us individually, because being off social media, being off big tech, has been really helpful for my mental health. I feel a lot better because I'm organizing with people, I'm talking with people. Like, that's how we need, and that's what we want. And that is kind of what the idea of social media was supposed to be. But we have these big tech companies that are kind of extracting that and taking what could be good from social media for their own gain. And so while there are kernels of good, we have to recognize that like that is not enough. And our power is to say it's not enough. So I would recommend you kind of start looking at what are your platforms right now and where do you want to shift? If you are an organization, like where are you housing all of your data? How can you make sure that that is more secure? How can you make sure that they can't touch a lot of the organizing and the plannings and the things that you guys are working on? And then from a personal perspective, where are you going to be communicating and organizing with? What do you want from digital? What do you want from social? Is the thing that you want from social connection? And are you getting that on the current social platforms? I would posit that probably not. And so the question is then, if that's what I want, then how do I get that outside of the systems? So those are the questions that I kind of want to leave with as we move into some of the more kind of practical and actionable podcasts that we'll have. I definitely want these to be like very, very actionable. They're going to feel a little bit more of like a workshop-y feel. And I also want to announce for paid members, we have a new program where you can join us live in studio because I, again, want these to be a lot more engaging. I want them to feel kind of workshop-y. So we will have a few upcoming events where you can join us in studio. You can interact with us, ask questions, share your story. So Thursday, we have Taj Smith on, and we are going to be talking about social resilience in the midst of climate collapse. We are all feeling the feels of the harms of digital suppression, the harms of social media, and the climate collapse as we are experiencing Earth Month. And we really just wanted to have a space for folks to just sit and be able to be with that. So we're gonna have that space. We'll be on YouTube Live, we'll be on LinkedIn Live, but you can also get in to the studio as a seedling member. Definitely check out your email and make sure that you get that code in your email. And then in June, we will have a conversation with Sharon Hurley Hall about Substack. So that will also be an opportunity for you to join us. So more to come on that. We will make sure that you can get access. And yeah, I just want to share that it's a hard moment. And I feel that, and I know that we are all feeling that. And so take the time to just breathe, take the time to check in on yourself and love yourself a little bit. We are entering Easter weekend. So hopefully there's a lot of like springtime activity. Go, as we say, touch grass, go for a walk. And, you know, these digital worlds are here, but they are not our only worlds. And we can break from them, and we have so much more power than we know. And I know, as Carole Cadwalladr says, we are farther than we realize, but at the same time, we have so much more power than we realize. And as soon as we start leveraging that and rising up together, they can't stop us. So I hope you have a good one, and we will be back next week.